Apple has been thinking about making a completely portless iPhone for years. It's in the name, but this means that the phone would have 0 ports, including the charging port. This actually goes back to 2019, when an analyst reported that Apple wanted its highest-end 2021 iPhone to offer a completely wireless experience. That obviously never happened, but Apple spent the following years making a portless iPhone much more realistic. MagSafe handled charging, while AirDrop, iCloud backups, and wireless updates reduced how often people actually needed to plug their phone into a computer. And recently, with the iPhone 17 Air, according to Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, Apple seriously considered removing USB-C from the iPhone during development, I suppose just to make the phone as thin as possible, before ultimately deciding to keep it. Most likely it would just be too much of a jump for people, and also would go against some EU regulations. I personally mainly use MagSafe for charging, but there are still times I might need the port for accessories, recovery, and high-speed file transfers, and the wireless technology just isn't there yet for stuff like this. Wireless charging also creates more heat and isn't always as convenient or reliable as a cable. So while removing the port could save internal space, right now they'd basically be removing an extremely useful feature just for the sake of the design, so it's been postponed. Back in 2007, Jobs made fun of phones that needed a stylus, asking who wants a stylus. But his point was more that you shouldn't need one to control your phone, because your fingers could do that instead. But Apple was actually researching stylus technology for touchscreen devices like the iPhone around the same time. Obviously, Apple eventually released the Apple Pencil in 2015, but that's always been limited to iPads. And you can't just take an Apple Pencil and use it on an iPhone, because compatible iPads have special hardware in the display that communicates with the pencil, and iPhone doesn't, so it just won't recognize it. But Apple has continued experimenting with ways around this. One of the more interesting patents came in 2025, where Apple described the pencil that uses optical sensors to track things like its movement, position, rotation, and tilt. And in the patent, it's actually shown being used with an iPhone along with an iPad, MacBook, and even an Apple Watch. So instead of requiring every screen to have special pencil hardware, therefore taking up valuable space, more of the tracking could be done by the pencil itself. Whether it would be built in or not is another question, but it's possible we may get a new iPhone Pencil for just $599 in the near future. Your iPhone can already connect directly to a monitor, but what it does once you connect it is pretty limited. USB-C iPhones can output up to 4K at 60Hz, and you can connect things like external storage, microphones, keyboards, and other USB devices. But when you plug in a monitor, your iPhone basically just puts a larger copy of its screen onto it. What people have wanted for years is an actual desktop mode, where you could dock your iPhone, connect a keyboard and mouse, and have things like Safari, messages, and files open in separate windows on a proper desktop. And Apple already has most of what it needs to do this. The iPad has Stage Manager, which allows resizable windows and proper external monitor support, and iOS and iPadOS share a lot of the same underlying technology. Modern iPhones are also easily powerful enough to handle this. There was a rumor that iOS 26 would finally add a Stage Manager-like mode for USB-C iPhones, and people have managed to enable hidden iPad-like functionality on iPhones, including windowed apps and extended external displays, basically by tricking iOS into behaving more like an iPad. So the technology is seemingly already there, but so far no ability to use it. Back in 2019, Apple was working on a feature that would turn your iPhone into a long-range walkie-talkie for text messages. Internally, Apple called it Project OGRS, or Off-Grid Radio Service, with help from Intel. The idea was that two iPhones could communicate directly using long-distance radio waves without needing cellular service or Wi-Fi. So say you're hiking or camping with someone and get separated somewhere with absolutely no reception. You could potentially still send them a message directly from your iPhone to theirs. This of course wasn't just AirDrop or Bluetooth, which only work over relatively short distances. OGRS reportedly used the 900 MHz radio spectrum, which could communicate over much longer distances, although we don't actually know exactly how far. The project was reportedly pretty far into development between Apple and Intel, but it was shelved in 2019. One major reason was that the Apple executive who was pushing the project left the company. At the same time, Apple settled its massive legal battle with Qualcomm and decided to move away from Intel modems, which OGRS was being developed around. That's about all I could publicly find, but something tells me the technology must have had flaws too, otherwise the project would have continued. But this would have been a very cool feature regardless. Apple has been trying to let your iPhone wirelessly charge things like AirPods for a surprisingly long time. This means putting your AirPods case on the back of your iPhone, have them snap on, and begin charging. This was first heavily rumored for the iPhone 11 back in 2019. It of course didn't end up releasing, but it was reported that the phones would have two-way wireless charging, and even said their larger batteries were partly meant to accommodate it. But things got more interesting with the iPhone 12. Regulatory filings revealed that its new MagSafe hardware could actually transmit wireless power to accessories, not just receive it. And Apple eventually used this ability with the MagSafe battery pack. Normally the battery pack charged your iPhone, but if you plugged the iPhone into power while they were still attached, the iPhone could actually send power backwards and charge the battery pack. But this technology for now does not work with AirPods. It's all just rumors, but but Apple reportedly targeted the feature for the iPhone 14 Pro, and it was rumored again for the iPhone 17 Pro at around 7.5 watts, yet it's nowhere to be found. My guess is that they're afraid people will be stupid and drop their AirPods from their phone, and want to add more guardrails before the feature finally comes out. Apple has been experimenting with a foldable iPhone for years, and unlike most of these features, this one is almost confirmed to actually release soon. Apple has tested several different designs, including a flip phone similar to the Samsung's Galaxy Z Flip, but more recent reports suggest they've settled on a book-style design, so you'd have roughly a 5.5-inch screen while it's closed, then unfold it to reveal a much larger screen around 7.7 inches, about the size of a small tablet. One of the biggest reasons Apple has taken so long apparently comes down to the crease. If you've used or seen a foldable phone before, you've definitely noticed the line running down the middle of the display where it constantly bends. Apple has reportedly been pretty obsessed with making that crease as unnoticeable as possible. They've apparently experimented with special support structures underneath the screen to spread out the stress from folding, and analysts say Apple even plans to use a type of amorphous metal, sometimes called liquid metal, within the hinge to improve durability and reduce deformation. And this is apparently still causing problems. A report in 2026 claimed Apple was running into more engineering difficulties than expected during testing, potentially affecting its production schedule. So Apple can obviously make an iPhone that folds, but struggles making millions of them that can fold thousands of times without the screen, hinge, or crease becoming a problem. The iPhone 15 Pro was originally supposed to completely change how its side buttons worked. Apple internally called this Project Bongo, and unlike a lot of cancelled iPhone ideas, this one got pretty far into development. Instead of normal power and volume buttons that physically click, Apple was developing flat pressure sensitive buttons. When you pressed one, sensors would detect the pressure and a small haptic motor would basically fake the feeling of a click. It's pretty similar to the home button on the iPhone 7 and the MacBook trackpad. They don't actually click when you press them for real, but it gives the illusion of clicking through a little vibration. This is what Apple was planning for both the power and volume buttons, with two volume buttons turning into one long button. This project reportedly had custom pressure sensors, haptic engines, firmware, and even a special low power system so that buttons could still detect presses when the phone was asleep. This could have made the buttons much more resistant to wear while also letting Apple detect things like lighter and harder presses, swipes, and some other gestures. But surprisingly late into development, Apple cancelled the whole thing. Testing reportedly showed high hardware failure rates and other engineering problems, with cost also being a concern. Although we did get the camera control button, which is pretty similar in concept, so this may be Apple's way of testing the concept before changing anything. Touch ID was removed to account for the phone being a full screen. However, Apple got close to bringing Touch ID back, except instead of bringing back the home button, your fingerprint would be scanned directly through the screen. And this isn't just based on patents or what Samsung has. Around 2021, multiple credible sources said Apple was physically testing under-display fingerprint sensors for the iPhone 13. Interestingly, it apparently wasn't meant to replace Face ID either. The iPhone could have potentially had both, so you could either look at your phone or touch the screen to unlock it. And at the time, this made a lot of sense because everyone was wearing masks, which suddenly made Face ID way less convenient. The feature was initially expected around 2023, and soon reportedly will be a feature on the upcoming foldable, but for now, we don't have it, with Apple choosing the ability to set up an alternate Face ID over adding touch. I do think having both will be useful, and if the rumors are true, I'm looking forward to how the foldable will handle it. Let me know in the comments which feature you'd like to see most, hype and share the video if you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.